Hello, my quilty friends. It's Stacy of Stacy Creates Stuff, and today I have a quilt for you that might take a little bit of time. It is not one of my super quick quilts, but I think you will like it just the same. I call this quilt Coastal Calm. That is the name of the collection from Cloud9 Fabrics, Coastal Calm. And it is a beautiful collection that was in these muted grays and beiges. And I decided that it needed just a little pop of color. So I added this fabric from Windham from their Moonlit collection. Now this is a wall hanging about 39 inches square, more or less, and it is a medallion quilt, which means that it starts with a center block and then borders are added continually until you get to the finished size of the quilt. So let's take a look at the breakdown of how this quilt is constructed. In the center, there is the medallion block, which is the Oddfellows Chain variation. Yes, that block has a name. After the center medallion block, we have the first border, which is just strips of fabric. The next border is a pieced border, and that uses blocks called hovering hawk. And I have arranged them so that the diagonals of this block form an undulating wave all around the border to give movement to this quilt. After that, we have the first inner border and then an outer border, and that completes the quilt. So now let me walk you through how to create that Oddfellows Chain variation block. Yes, it has a name. That's the center block. I will also show you how to construct the hovering hawks, and I will give you tips on how to cut your pieces for your border so that your quilt remains square. And this works, of course, even if your quilt is rectangular, and by square I mean so that it doesn't kind of make a whooshy shape. Have you ever had a quilt that had a smile at the top and a frown at the bottom, where there was just too much border? And your quilters probably don't like that. So let me show you how to make that be perfect. So let's start with that Oddfellows Chain variation, the block that's in the center. If we take a look at the major components of this block, it is essentially a 9-patch and reminiscent of a sawtooth star. So in the very center, we just have a single fabric, so that part's easy peasy. The corners are made up of 4 patches, and we'll look a little more closely at those in just a moment. And the top and bottom and side pieces, which are a flying geese with a pieced center part for the goose, I'm going to show you how to make those. It's not overly complicated. We just have to break it down. But let's start with those 4-patch corners. Those are simply composed of 2 squares and 2 half-square triangles. All the corners are the same, and they're just rotated into position. For those top and bottom and side pieces, we're going to start by making a flying geese unit, but a small one. This is part of that inner part of the large flying geese. Then we're going to add a rectangle above that. And then 2 triangles go on the sides. And so yes, this forms a very odd shape, which we then have to trim down once it's all sewn together. And we will trim it down into that large triangular piece that's part of the flying geese. When you trim it down, you want to use the 45-degree angle on your ruler, and you want to make sure that that intersection, as shown in the photo here, is at the intersection of the 45-degree angle and 1/4 inch in from the edge of the ruler. Aligning that 45-degree angle along the seam will allow you to trim off any excess from that side triangle and also from the dark rectangle. And you will trim both sides of that. Once that is trimmed, you will add the large side triangles that will form the finished flying geese unit. And then of course you make 4 of those and you rotate them into position. They are all constructed exactly the same. And then you basically have a 9 patch, 3 rows with 3 units each. Once you sew each of the 3 units together to form a row, then you sew those 3 rows together and you have your center block. The next step is to add that first border. And so you will measure from the top to the bottom of the block and you will cut 2 strips that are that length. Once you've sewn those to the sides and pressed, then you will measure from the left to the right of the block. I measure at both the top and the bottom. If those measurements are different, I average the 2. And you will cut 2 strips that are that length, and you will sew those across the top and the bottom. Now we are ready for the pieced border, which is made of the Hovering Hawks block. Now this block is very easy to construct. It is made of a lot of half square triangles and a few squares. It is a 16-piece block, and each of the 16 pieces are the same size. They're either the square or the half square triangle, and you just need to make sure that you arrange them in the proper configuration. All of the blocks are constructed exactly the same, and then they are just rotated to form that undulating line all the way around the border. Now that you have all those blocks made, you are going to sew 4 together, and that will go on one side of your center medallion with its first border. And you will sew 4 others together and put that on the other side. And of course, you want to make sure that all of the orientations are correct for your hovering hawks before you sew those together. Once you have those side pieces on, you can go ahead and sew 6 blocks together to go across the top and 6 blocks to go together for the bottom. Once you have all of that pieced border in place and it's all pressed, it is now time to do the inner border. Just like we did for that first border around the center medallion, you want to measure from the top to the bottom on the left side, across the middle, top to bottom, and also on the right side of the quilt. So you'll have 3 measurements. Hopefully, they're all the same or very, very close. If they are not, then you are going to want to take the average. So add those 3 measurements together, divide by 3, and you can round a little up or a little down so that you don't end up with some sort of like 5/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch. It's fine to round up or down to the nearest quarter. Once you have that measurement, you're going to cut 2 strips that length from the inner border fabric. Once you have those sewn to the left and the right side of the quilt and pressed, you are now going to measure across the top of the quilt, through the center of the quilt, left to right, and then also across the bottom of the quilt. Again, hopefully these measurements are very close to each other, if not identical. You will take the average of those, add them together, divide by 3, and that is the length that you will cut. And again, you can round up or down to the nearest 1/4 of an inch. Now that you have that inner border all situated, you are going to do the same with the outer border. And nicely with this quilt, it is only 39.5 inches long, so you're not even having to piece any of these borders. It all comes from a strip of fabric. So you do the same thing. You are going to measure top to bottom, through the center top to bottom, and on the right top to bottom. Find your measurement, average it out, cut your outer border strips that length. Cut 2 of them. So 1 to the left, 1 to the right. Now you're going to do the same across the top. You are going to measure from the left to the right across the top of the quilt, left to right through the center, and left to right from the bottom. Add those together, divide by 3. That finds your average. Round up or down to the nearest 1/4, cut 2 strips that length, and there you have your top and bottom border. Sew those on, and your quilt top is all done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and at the very least learned a little extra about putting on a border. Sometimes having a small quilt that has some slightly complex parts to it just makes quilting all that much more fun and enjoyable and a little bit of a challenge. So I hope you give this one a try. If you love the colors of this quilt as much as I do, the kits are available from my favorite quilt shop, Vintage Pink and Green. They are available in store at the Snow Hill location, and they are also available online. Until next time, my friends, why not check out this?